I have given a name to my pain. The Batman.
Always waiting for some Batman to save you.
It's simple. We kill the Bat of Gotham. You don't really think you'll win, do you? I'm Batman.
Hey now, you are listening to episode 97 of the Batman on Film podcast. BOF is the sponsor, as well as a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network. Check out all the shows at batmanpodcastnetwork.com. Ryan, any suggestion this week or?
Yes, I came prepared this week.
Okay.
This week's recommendation would be Batman the Animated Podcast, hosted by Justin Michael. It's a really good retrospective podcast that goes through all of the Batman the Animated Series episodes, and he just kind of relaunched it in like a season 2 kind of format. And it's really good. What he does is he'll pick an episode, and one episode will be discussing the episode of the series with a fan, and then the next episode will be discussing that episode with somebody who actually worked on the show, which, you know, he's had people like Paul Dini on, you know, so it's a really good, enlightening show if you're a fan of the animated series.
All right. Yes, I know that podcast. I have listened to a few episodes.
It's great.
All right. I am the host of this here podcast, as well as the founder and editor-in-chief of Batman on Film, Bill Jett Ramey. With me today is just one of the Batman on Film Roundtablers, and that would be Ryan Hoss. Ryan, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to do this episode, and I'm excited about the guests we have today.
Yes, and Justin is in Vegas for a wedding, and Rick Shue is, and I swear to God, I'm not making this up. Rick Shue is camping. He is camping this weekend, which is hilarious if you know Rick. He is like the most high-maintenance dude that I know. But he's actually going with his daughter. So, all right, Ryan, go ahead, and I'll let you, you'll be the co-host this week since...
Oh, sweet.
Since Rick is off and about. Introduce our guest today, sir.
All right, well, the first guest we have is I think, let's see, who mentioned him the other week? I think it was Justin called him BOF royalty even. He's been a member of the site for years. He's a great dude. He's been on a few of our Batman and Batman Returns commentary episodes recently. So please welcome back to the show, Mr. Chris Clow.
I don't know if I could take this royalty. I mean,
it's not wrong. Yes, it's not wrong.
No, I mean, and I said it before and I'll say it again. BOF is like home to me, so it's always great coming home. Thank you for bringing me back, and we've got a very worthy topic today, so happy to be here.
Chris, when did you find BOF, and when did you start contributing to BOF?
I think I found it, oh my God, you're making me go pretty far back. I must have found it sometime in like 2001 or 2. It was relatively early on, because you started in 98, so... it must have been around 2001 or 2, and then I actually didn't start contributing until 2006 when I was just graduated high school. Man, I remember the last day of high school, I wore a Superman Returns t-shirt because I was just trying to push that movie out the door on
you were the only
on my
one.
way out of high school. That's how long ago it was. But then I started writing really terrible comic book reviews for you, I think that fall.
No. I think all your stuff's been
more terrible than mine.
No. Glorified plot synopses. I got better because, Bill, you had faith in me, but it was a rough start. If I look back on those now, and I think they're still on the site, they were for Nightwing. I mean, you don't need to go looking for them, but if
they're in there somewhere, they're there somewhere. Yes, I did have faith in you, man, and I even I recommended you for a very cool gig back in 2011, if you recall. So,
I do recall because the gig I still have at movies.com every week. So, much obliged. So, yes, BOF is home. So I'm happy to be home.
Chris and I actually were on the set of The Dark Knight Rises together in Pittsburgh.
Oh, so good.
Wow.
Movies.com. Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, just if ever there was a good place for us to meet, it was there. Yeah. You know, I mean, we spent years talking Batman on film, and then all of a sudden we are at Batman on film, literally.
Absolutely.
So,
The only problem,
Go ahead, Paul.
the only problem was it was Pittsburgh, right? So that's the one problem.
We were at the stadium. We saw
the stadium got blown up.
They blow up the stadium. Movies.com contacted me and asked if I wanted to go, and I said, well, I'm kind of going, but I know a guy who would be really good for this gig, and like Chris said, he's been with them ever since. So very good, very good. All right, go ahead, Ryan. Finish up here.
Yeah. Well, he already kind of spoiled his presence on the show, but that's totally fine because we love him. This is a guy that's been on the show a couple times recently in some of our Star Wars episodes, and he's been just a huge breath of fresh air. Great to have on the show. And we've been trying to think of a good excuse to get him on actual BOF proper show. And I was discussing this week's topic to him, and it turns out that he's a pretty big fan of what we're going to be talking about anyway. So it seemed like a perfect fit, especially with Chris on the show. So welcome back to the show, Mr. Paul Hermann.
Thank you. And for people, I want people to realize that, and I'm not this BS in here. If it wasn't for Batman on Film and Bill's site, I would never be in podcasting to begin with. So, and that is no BS. And I'm not kidding, man. This is like legit 100%. This was, I met Sean through this and everything. I got, Chris, and I've met some of my really close friends, Chris and John Beerley, people, all because I started listening to the original Batman on Film podcast and kind of things from there. So, Bill, you are the reason that I'm literally here today talking about this without you indirectly inviting me. I just, through you, all this awesome podcast and stuff has happened,
cool.
Because you started a site. So I want you to know, thank you.
Oh, no, you're welcome. I'm like I said, when I recorded this, I guess it was a Star Wars podcast. I wanted to get you on for a Batman show so we can talk Batman. So we're going to talk Batman. We're going to talk the newly released animated film Batman versus Two-Face, which I didn't get my screening copy until Wednesday, and it had came out on Tuesday, and I didn't watch it until last night, and then I watched it again this morning, but I am ready to talk about it. I think both Ryan and I have talked quite a bit about our fondness, our love for the 60s Batman TV show. And so I kind of want to rehash that. I mean, I know that if you know me and you listen to the podcast, you know it's why I became a Batman fan in the first place when I was a kid. So I wanted to give the other two just a quick chance to just to briefly talk about what that show means to them and anything else in regards to the Adam West Batman. So Chris, what's your take on that show? Where does it stand in your Batman? Where's its place in your Batman fandom?
Well, I kind of had a winding road of appreciation when it comes to the 66 show because, I mean, as a kid, when they're playing reruns all over the place, and if you are a really dedicated Bat fan, even just from being a small child, then you're gonna love the 60s show. Right? It's natural. It's as natural as gravity. So when I was a kid, it was the 60s show and it was the animated show, and I didn't care about tone. As long as it was Batman, I was in. But then, I got a little bit older, and I really think that it must be mostly because it just wasn't available for so long. But I started to resent it a little by the time I was in high school. Like a typical teenager, right? You're into the dark and you're into the angst and you're into all that crap. So I started to resent it because I had a high level of familiarity with the comics for, most of my life. And it was hard for me not to see the 60s show as, it was a parody. So to me, I misconstrued that as having it make fun of the material that I loved. Yes. But, as years went by and I pulled the stick out of my ass, so to speak, and particularly because the show was released on home media for the first time in a pronounced way, I reabsorbed it and I fell in love with it all over again. Even though it is a parody of the original material, it's hard not to just fall in love with the straight face that Adam West played in that show. And it's hard not to fall in love with just the outright strangeness of the situations. And even still, there are aspects of that show that are truer to the comics than a lot of modern adaptations are. The Penguin is what immediately comes to mind for me. I mean, we've never had Burgess Meredith, weirdly enough, is probably the most truthful vision of the Penguin that we've ever seen in live action before. So I love and adore that show now. It's just kind of funny for me because I appreciate it far more as a man than I did as a teen. So it's like I hopped over it in my teen years because I wanted the material that actually took Batman seriously. But now I can have a sort of holistic, full encompassing of everything, and I love it.
I'm with you. I think a lot of people had the word, what's the word? To shun it for a while and say, like you said, oh, it's making fun of Batman. And then and it is ironic, and you brought that up as well, as you grow up and you're a man and you finally appreciate it rather than when you were a young man or a teenager. So I'm with you on that. Paul, what's your relationship with Batman, Adam West, and all that, and all that comes with it?
Well, so I'm a little older than Chris. So I was in I think first grade when 89 came out, or the Batman 89. And I grew up with, this is literally my Batman. I have a brother who's 6 years older than I am, and he got me into comic books, and he had The Dark Knight Returns and around 89. And I remember reading that, but also I had that as a companion with Batman 66. So I had these three really just kind of all out there versions of Batman. But Batman 66 was my introduction to the larger world of Batman. When I was a kid, I was just jazzed for Batman 89 because I loved comic books and superheroes. And even though I'm more of a Marvel guy, Batman was the only live action I could get of anything that was a legit superhero. I wasn't really into Superman. Sorry, Chris. So when Batman 66, was around, I got to learn all the nuances of Batman, Robin, all of the villains gallery. If it wasn't for 66 Batman, I would never have known who the Riddler is, who the Penguin is, and all these, the Catwoman, all these different characters I learned from watching the 66 show because of how pumped I was for Batman. And the thing is, Chris, it's funny, you looked at it as a parody as a teenager. When I was a kid, I took it 100% wholesale.
Oh, I did too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
As did I.
Yeah, it's worth noting that there a lot of the early episodes, especially, are actually straight adaptations of the comic books of the time too.
Yes.
Yeah. So I appreciate and love the 66 Batman show so much. I mean, so many. I remember after I watched 89 Batman, I would devour as much as I could. With the 66 show, because that was my way of learning about the Batman characters, because I didn't buy the comic books at the time. So I have a huge love for the series. And I remember for years, the movie too, the 66 movie, I watched that a ton because of, so, it took years, for me to finally get this on video because they finally released it a couple years ago. And, I love the Batman 66, whole thing. I love I love everything about it. So definitely something I grew up on. I love it. I never took it as it was a slap in the face like a lot of people thought it was at one point. But yeah, that's
good for you. Good for you. That's one of the I call it one of my most embarrassing times of my Batman fandom is shunning Adam West because he was my first Batman. So I've tried to make amends for that over the years. So let's talk about the movie a little bit. And of course, this is a sequel to Return of the Caped Crusaders. It is also Adam West's final performance. Maybe his final, was it his final performance of anything? It was of Batman as well.
I think he's some unaired episodes of Family Guy probably still left to go.
But yeah, he was, of course, Adam West passed away not too long ago, and this is kind of his, it is, not kind of, it's his swan song as Batman. Let me ask you a question before we really dive into the movie. What are your thoughts on continuing this movie series with someone else voicing Batman. Would you want that or not? I think it's like, I have two thoughts about this, but I'll let, and ironically, Two-Face is the villain of this movie. But, Ryan, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I'm right there with you, because I was, you can't help but think about that, especially, you watch this movie here, and if you watch through the credits, they even have a, in memory of Adam West thing at the very end. So you can't help but think about, like, where does it go from here, and should it go anywhere from here?
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, I'm like, well, it would be a shame to let this version of Batman kind of go away. I mean, I've loved that there's been such a resurgence of it throughout the years. With the re-release or the release of the show on Blu-ray, we've had all these comic books that have been written in the 66 universe, and these two films have been just a great love letter to that entire era. And it would be a shame to see these kind of movies specifically kind of go away, especially because we do have people like Julie Newmar and Burt Ward around to continue providing their talents to it. But on the other hand, Adam West is Batman 66. He is the show. He is the character. And we've talked about it before, like on the show itself, that show just wouldn't work without Adam West, in live action. I mean, he is the show. So part of me wonders how could they continue this and it still kind of hit those notes that it needs to hit without him. And it would obviously be a huge loss.
All right, Chris, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think it should continue. And mostly Ryan put it very succinctly. Adam West is so closely identified with this version of the character that you kind of have to ask yourself, well, at some point, when does it end? I'm perfectly fine with more comic book exploitations. I think those books have been a lot of fun. But if you're talking about some kind of cinematic effort or television effort that requires performers to fill these roles, it would just be someone doing an Adam West impression. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, would do a disservice to the idea of continuing this iteration of the franchise. I mean, you and I, everybody on this panel has seen other versions of Batman that were inspired by Adam West. I mean, the first one that immediately comes to mind is the Brave and the Bold show, right? Mm-hmm. And that stuff succeeds well enough on its own. I'm weirdly enough, I'm stealing a phrase from history, all right? I'm going to steal a phrase from Edwin Stanton at the deathbed of Abraham Lincoln. Now he belongs to the ages. Mm-hmm. And every time we will look back at this era of Batman, we will know that it's Adam. I mean, Adam West has been the cheerleader for the show's consideration as a legitimate form of pop art for 50 years. And without him, it just seems perhaps a little disingenuous to continue this iteration of the franchise. We've seen people resurrected in movies over the last year. We've seen all sorts of efforts to try and capture those original kinds of performances. Adam West cannot be replicated. So I would have a hard time seeing someone else take up the part.
Okay. Paul, any thoughts on this?
Well, I'm kind of torn because I love like the Batman 66 universe, and even though Adam West is the universe, I love all like the campiness of it too, and how fun it can be. So I'm kind of torn. I kind of tend to agree that it probably shouldn't continue without Adam West, but if it did, I'd be interested to see how it would be done and if it would be the same. Because, I mean, I'll be honest here, like, I'm watching the last two of these animated series, Adam West doesn't sound like Adam West, from when he was, a young man in the 60s. Yeah. I mean, so it's a considerable difference. I mean, he sounds super old and he looks young. So, I mean, it's like, it's obviously, you're going to give it to Adam West and, which ironically, I think Burt Ward sounds pretty good still for.
He sounds the same. I thought he sounds
really good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he sounds great. But, obviously when you're, 80 years old, I mean, you're going to sound a lot different. So when you put me in that context, I'm like, I could see it continuing, but it'd have to be a worthy story, which again, I want to get into that as well. So yeah, I think maybe we'll see. I
agree with everybody's what they said, and and so that's kind of weird because there were some different opinions. But I'm kind of with Paul here. If I guess I would say on the surface, I would rather just this be it as far as any kind of movie, whether live action or animation. But on the other hand, if they decided to continue, I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't say, oh, that's disrespectful. It wouldn't even cross my mind. I would, and there is a part of me thinks that, continue on, Adam West can live on, even if someone else is voicing the character, that it's still Adam West, it's still Adam West's Batman, and it still would look like him. And I would like to see, more adventures in this universe outside of just the comics. So I know that's probably, I didn't take a definitive answer here, but I mean, that's, I guess that's what I thought. Yeah. All right. So, let's talk about the movie now. The movie is, of course, called Batman vs. Two-Face. And I think one of the coolest things about it was, and I know what I thought when I heard this news was that, William Shatner was going to voice Two-Face, and it worked out really well. So let's just start with that. Chris, what was your take? What would you think about their take on Two-Face and Shatner's voice performance?
Well, I mean, as you guys probably know, I'm very familiar with Mr. William Shatner. In fact, one of my other podcasts that I contribute to on a regular basis is a franchise that he is basically the father of, Star Trek.
Yeah.
So when I heard this, I was really, really intrigued because if the show had continued into a fourth season and if they exploited Two-Face at some point, Shatner could have played him.
Yeah.
And Shatner has, I mean, even though Star Trek, the original series, was a relatively serious show when it comes to tone, everybody has tried to sort of mimic the bombastic kind of performance that Shatner brought to the table as Captain Kirk. I mean, he was all over the place. His delivery was really, really, let's say, unique. Let's say Shatnerian, right? I mean, it was very singular. So the idea of him playing Two-Face in a film that represents a part that he could have played in person 50 years ago was a really unique idea. I was not expecting the level of delineation that he would provide between Harvey Dent and Two-Face. He put way more energy into it than I thought he would.
Yeah, great point.
So I was really, really happy with what the part ultimately brought to the table when it comes to this movie. I loved the origin story. I mean, it was so just specifically perfect for the 60s Batman tone.
Yes.
That it just worked for me very, very well. So really happy with Mr. Shatner's performance. I mean, I never thought that he would intersect with the world of Batman, but now that he has, makes perfect sense that he would in this movie.
Well, speaking of that, you brought it up. There was plans to do a Two-Face episode during the 60s run, and
right.
There was actually a script that Harlan Ellison wrote. It was the two-way crimes of Two-Face, and he was deemed too grotesque, too scary for the show, and so they did not produce that episode. But it did get a comic book version.
The producers, plus the producer of the show had a very bad relationship with Ellison and didn't want his script to make it to air as well.
Yeah. So politics involved in that as well. Yeah. So it did. There is a comic book version. I did read it, and it's different. It's completely different than the movie. So if it is out there, if you want to see what they would have done,
really,
yes, it's part of the Batman '66 stuff that DC did. Yes,
Harlan Ellison would often create bad relationships with producers. It was pretty common for that. He wrote probably what is considered to be the best Star Trek episode, but it was heavily modified by the time it actually went to air, and it doesn't really resemble what he originally wrote. So when I hear that he butted heads with producers, that sounds about right.
And just one bit of, and I don't know how accurate this is, but it's out there. Apparently, they wanted to hire Clint Eastwood to play Harvey Dent Two-Face, and the character was like I believe he was I got to think back. It's been a while since I read that comic. He was a TV reporter that had a lamp fall on his face and scar him. Am I correct?
That's actually the origin in the comics of Two-Face 2. What's his name? Paul Sloan, I believe. And that's what happens. He's a TV reporter, and he's not a reporter, but he's a TV actor. And he's a TV actor, and they're doing a recreation a recreation of the Two-Face story, and they actually ended up using, and this is a crazy story, and they do a reenactment of what happened to Harvey Dent, and somebody swapped the fake acid with real acid, and he becomes Two-Face, another Two-Face basically, and but then because of the Comics Code, years later when they reprinted that story, they couldn't use acid because that was too gruesome or didn't fit the code. So they replaced that entire panel with a light blowing out and, blowing up on his face. And that's kind of stuck. And that's been used elsewhere. That's what happens, in the Telltale Batman games even. So that's why that happens. Yeah.
You're right. I forgot about that. You're absolutely right. All right, Paul, what's your take on Shatner and Two-Face in this movie?
I liked his performance. I thought like Chris said, he did a great job of emulating, Harvey Dent and then Two-Face. Like I was kind of impressed, and just like what, I'm going to emulate exactly what Chris said. He pretty much would have been a perfect, he could have been a perfect Two-Face back in the, in the actual series. So that would have been really super interesting to see that kind of depicted. I always, it's funny, Two-Face, I always wondered why he wasn't in the 66 series, because again, I only knew the characters, the villains from the 66 series. And then when I watched the animated series, I'm like, who's this Two-Face guy? How come he wasn't in the original series? He just explained it to me. Interesting. So that's good.
That is true. Ryan?
Yeah.
Shatner, Two-Face.
Yeah. So, I mean, I loved when they announced that he was going to provide the voice of Two-Face, because you couldn't come up with something more perfect, honestly, because, William Shatner is every bit of an icon of the 60s as Adam West was. And they were on two of the biggest shows of the time. Shatner and West both have a very unique, acting style would be very hard to kind of replicate. So as adversaries on this kind of show, I think it's just absolutely perfect. And to the point everybody else said, how Shatner would have been able to play the character in the 60s, as a viable choice. It provides, in this, animated movie, it just provides an extra layer of authenticity to the entire project that just kind of makes it that much more, deep into the kind of lore of Batman 66 that you wouldn't really get otherwise. So, and he did a great job with it too. He just didn't sleepwalk through it or anything. You could tell he put a lot of effort into it, and his distinction between, Harvey Dent and Two-Face. And, he had a lot of different roles, more than just Harvey Dent and Two-Face to kind of go over in this movie. So I thought it was interesting.
And they made him look like William Shatner from the 60s.
In the cartoon,
yes. Harvey Dent was Shatner, like they, cast him. And my only fear was that he would kind of mail it in, but he did a hell of a job. And great point by Chris is that he was very distinct as both when he was Harvey and when he was Two-Face. So, I had no complaints. So let's just talk about our general thoughts about the movie overall, the plot and so forth. Paul, I'll let you start. After you watch the movie, how do you feel about it?
All right. I hope you didn't set me up to everyone gonna rip on me after I say this, because I think I'm a little afraid to say this. So, but I'm just gonna be real. I can only do me.
That's what we do. Yeah, that's what we are.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So here's the deal. I like the first half, the first two acts of the movie. Yeah. The third act, it got a little it got away from itself. It kind of felt it jumped the shark, if you will. Okay. It got a little too and it's interesting because you brought there's actually a comic based on this original script that this, Two-Face character is going to be in the actual, series. And that's what I was kind of expecting, because I didn't even know that existed. Yeah. So when I was going into the film, I'm thinking it's going to be probably, a literal translation of what Two-Face would be like in the actual, movie or the TV series. And, it kind of weirded me out because I expected it to start off the same way as the TV show. And I don't remember if Return of the Caped Crusaders started off the same way. I don't think it did, but for some reason I kind of expected it to start off in the blah, 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 in Gotham City.
Well, they did that in the Caped Crusaders. They had the narrator.
Okay, they did do that.
Yes.
Yeah, but they didn't have that with this one.
They didn't.
So that kind of bummed me out. And then, So then after a while, I just kind of was like, okay, I'm into this. I'm into this. I liked the fact that they had a rivalry between Harvey and Robin. And then like once they like Two-Face's face started coming like in and out of, his face, I was like, this isn't really what I was signed up for. And then, so it was a little disappointing at the end. I felt like it was when Robin became a Two-Face. I'm like, okay, I'm out of this. So yeah, it wasn't my thing.
Okay. I mean, look, it to me, I agree. It got a little bit, even with the Cape Crusaders, I think it's a hair long for this. And I don't know if that makes sense to you all. It does. It's really exciting.
I got you.
And there's a part where it gets just like, okay, this could have ended quicker, or you could have, whatever. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but I felt the same way with this one, even though I did enjoy it overall. Chris, what was your overall take of the movie, sir?
It certainly didn't bother me. I thought that, I alluded to the fact that earlier I was really charmed by the way that they decided to introduce Two-Face with his origin story. I mean, concentrated evil scarring half of his face just seems like perfectly 60s. I mean, the ultimate plot near the end I wasn't particularly happy with, I guess, but it didn't really offend me or anything. It was just like, this is how we're winding it down. It seems a little anticlimactic, but I mean, I was so charmed by Shatner's performance and the energy that he put into creating two different voices. And I was really, really just sitting there trying to absorb every single syllable that Adam West uttered, because I knew that this was going to be the last time. So it's hard for me to separate the emotion that I feel related to the fact that this is Adam West's final Batman performance and this movie. I mean, on its own merits, it's certainly not the most engaging version of the 66 Batman that I've ever seen, but I can't really say that it's disappointing to me in many facets, except for maybe the way that it ended. But I loved the performances so much that does a lot in my mind to make up some ground that the story might not have covered as much.
Gotcha. Ryan.
I agree with a lot of what both of you guys said. I don't know if this is... It's hard for me to say this is better than the Return of the Cape Crusaders, because Return of the Cape Crusaders was the new thing. It had never been done before. We've been waiting for the show to come back for so long. But what Batman vs. Two-Face is able to do is it kind of knows that, and it just kind of tells another story and goes in a different direction, almost on purpose. Something that I thought was very interesting. I listened to a few interviews with, Tucker about how this, what they were doing different in this second film. And they said that they took inspiration from a lot of the earlier episodes in season 1, where they would have a lot of scenes that take place at night and a lot of just a little bit more moody type, stuff in Gotham. And I thought that was really interesting, because it was like a concerted effort on their part to kind of give us something different. And I really appreciated that. And I think it matches the kind of darker tone you would want to see with Two-Face. But overall, I enjoyed it. And although the story does have some dips at points, the performances is why you watch this thing, to see what Shatner's going to do with Two-Face, to see, what Adam West is going to do in his final performance as Batman. And it's both sad, but it's also both like triumphant at the same time, just to be able to, it's a total gift to be able to watch something like this. And so, I appreciate a lot of the story elements. I kind of knew ahead of time that they were going to do some different stuff with Two-Face's origin in this film. And I appreciated that they did something different. I'm kind of glad that they didn't just make an animated episode of the original 60 script, just because it's something different. We've already have the other, comic book version too. So, and it's kind of a cool thing. I could see them doing a movie version of this in the 60s, where they could just throw in a bunch of villains, as cool cameos to get concentrated evil and have it blast on his
concentrated evil. That is,
yeah.
That's a good. It really was a good idea, and I had no problem with his origin. I'm glad he was I'm glad he was a district attorney. I didn't know if they would do the TV version with him being a news guy. I didn't know what to expect because I kind of kept myself unspoiled on it. So that all worked for me. I just thought the latter middle part to the getting into the finale was just a little tedious. That's it.
Yeah, but there's some fun gags and stuff that I really liked. I like that at one point you get to see an abandoned sign factory. So there's like some kind of context as to why Gotham has all these signs of everything everywhere. I thought that was cool. I really liked that they were able to throw in characters like Harleen Quinzel and Hugo Strange in. That's cool to see 60s versions of those characters. And just voice cast wise, I was not expecting them to do something like this, but the way they incorporated Lee Merriweather.
Oh, I was just about to bring that up. Yeah.
Oh, that was so good. And then they had her switch places with Julie Newmar's Catwoman, and she gets to be Catwoman too. That was brilliant.
That was my favorite. I wrote it down because I was taking a few notes when I was when I was watching it, and when that happened, I went, "That's freaking awesome!" Because I did not know that Lee Merriweather was voicing Lucille Diamond. So I looked it up I said, that looks like Lee Merriweather Catwoman from the movie. And I paused the movie with the Internet Movie Database, looked up the cast, and lo and behold, there it was. And I said, that's pretty brilliant there. Here's a couple other things I wanted to bring up. I don't know if y'all caught this or not. This one was pretty obvious. They had the 1939 Batman suit in a case in the Batcave. Yeah, that was pretty blatant. But in the courtroom when Harvey Dent has King Tut on trial, there's a shot, and in the background there's a painting, and it's Neil Hamilton in the painting.
Oh.
And Neil Hamilton was Commissioner Gordon in the 60s TV show, and of course he does not look a lot like how they portray Commissioner Gordon in the animated movie because he's got glasses and he has the mustache. But yeah, you can catch that in that court scene. There is that. One of the, instead of pow, zap, wham, one of the punch, what do you want to call them? I don't know what they call those. So punch balloons or whatever they are.
Yeah.
One of them was Sprang, which was clearly Dick Sprang.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah.
I loved that.
Yeah, and is it just me? And I want to bring it to y'all can decide. When Batman and Robin click their heels together and they become rockets, is that a nod to Batman and Robin?
To Batman and Robin?
Skates?
Almost wonder maybe it was. Yeah.
It had to have been. Even if it was subconscious, if you're a Batman fan, it's hard not to make that connection. But yeah, that was pretty funny.
Speaking of the captions, I literally laughed out loud when Batman slapped Robin and it said slap. I lost it.
Yeah, that was good stuff there. So let's just wind this up here and overall thoughts and maybe just grade it, and I guess it goes back to my question I asked you earlier. I mean, does this feel like a finale, or does it feel like there could be more? And we've already kind of talked about whether or not we want more. So, Paul, what's your grade it? And if you want to give it a letter grade, go ahead. And just your final thoughts, dude.
Okay, so I'm gonna to give context. I gave Return to Cape Crusaders a B. I thought it was really fun. I'd give this a C.
Okay.
I think it wasn't bad. It wasn't great. If you're a diehard Batman fan, I think you're gonna have a lot of fun with this. It just wasn't as I was looking for a literal translation, but I have the comic now. Thanks for Bill telling me. So now I'm gonna read that tonight.
Oh, good. You're welcome, sir. Chris.
Yeah, if I had to assign it a score, I generally work on a 10-point scale. I would probably give it an 8. Now that could change. I mean, I would love to see on further reflection, I would love to see a proper send off for this version of Batman. I think they could probably do that even without Adam West's involvement. And if Batman isn't in it, it seems like it might be a little more poignant if they didn't try to recreate Adam West's voice in some capacity with someone else, but they just tried to give service to that world that he was so pivotal in creating. I mean, I would love to see a proper send-off for this version of the character. Even if it was in a comic book, I mean, I would be very much into that. We've seen a lot of tributes to Mr. West over the last 4 months or so in the wake of his death, but he is definitely such an important pillar of Batman history that I think he's definitely earned that. But when it comes to this movie specifically, 8 out of 10, and I had fun with it, and seeing Adam West's last performance is really what helps to elevate it in my mind. He doesn't sound the same, absolutely, but it's hard not to be charmed once again by his straight-faced dedication to this version of Batman.
Chris, here's a question. How does Batman 66, this Batman, how does that end for you? How does he go out in your imagination?
Coming up with details is difficult, but if I had the thing that just kind of immediately comes to mind is riding off into the sunset. I think that if they left it at a point where he gets in that incredible car and rides off waving to everybody that loves him, that would be a pretty nice and poignant moment for not just the characters potentially, but for us as fans of that version of Batman to say goodbye. Gotcha.
All right, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know what? You might even be able to watch Two-Face first and then watch Return of the Caped Crusaders and see if that makes it a better nostalgic through line for you, to see if it makes sense as the ending of the character, maybe. Although this one kind of picks up where the previous one left off. If I had to grade them, I think I would grade this one slightly higher. Maybe like Return of the Caped Crusaders is a B and this one's a B plus or something like that. Mainly because this one doesn't make fun of The Dark Knight Rises. But, that's very petty though. But yeah, it's just a good time, and it's a great thing just to be able to have another entry into this world. I'm glad that they both exist, and I like how different both of them are, and I like that this one chose to tell a different story, firmly cement the character of Two-Face into this Batman 66 world. And there's just a lot to love in it. If I had to think of one of my favorite line in this, there's a little less fan service in this one in terms of the lines, but Batman had a great line in this when he talks to Two-Face in the final confrontation, and he says, "You're on the auction block and my fists are the highest bidders." I just laughed out loud at that because it's such a Batman 66 line.
And it also reminded me of The Brave and the Bold, a little bit. What was it? The Hammers of Justice and all that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a nod to that, which is a nod to Batman 66, and it just is all in the same world. So,
yeah.
All right. I will say that I would probably give it a B-ish, somewhere in the B range. I was probably more excited for the first one just because it was new and it was going to be the closest to a live action 60s Batman we were going to get, even though, in animation, of course. And so that excitement kind of wasn't there for this one, but then you had the Shatner Two-Face thing, which kind of took the place of it. So that's where I'm at. I would like to have seen, if this is it, something a little bit more, like Chris said, right off into the sunset type of deal, because this seems kind of, or it's on the other hand, you can just continue to play out his adventures in your head any way you want to, as a fan of it. So that's where I'm at. Anybody have any one last thought on it before we get out of here and do some plugs?
I'm glad that it exists. I'm glad that we were able to have both of these movies. Even if it just ends up standing as kind of a duology, having the chance to see new material in this version of Batman's world is nice. It's an appropriate extension of our love for the 60s show, and for 60s show super fans, I'm sure it was a absolute thrill. So I'm glad it exists. It's unfortunate that Mr. West is no longer with us and that he can't do this one more time, but considering what the movies tried to accomplish, they are very worthy additions to the legacy of 60s Batman. Obviously, they're not going to stand shoulder to shoulder with the show and with the original movie, but it's nice to see this extended one more time well after that show went off the air.
Okay, let's do some plugs, Paul. And I want to ask everybody a question as you plug. And the question is, where are you? And I can't go without at least asking, since we're less than a month away. Plug what you want to plug, and where are you anticipation-wise for Justice League? Paul, you start.
Oh, okay. You can find me on Twitter at Hermann22, aka P-Thug. Also follow my Star Wars podcast at Blaster Cannon Pod, Cannon Canon, not the actual cannon like shooting things. To be honest, I'm really excited. I'm actually probably more excited for Justice League than Thor Ragnarok. Now, and the reason why, and I'm a diehard Marvel zombie. The reason why is because, I've seen all this stuff. I mean, Ragnarok looks great, but I have been anticipating like DC stuff for a while. I've actually been a fan of DCEU, for the most part. I've liked all the films. And, so it's just something different, and I'm really anticipating like to see what like all these heroes together is going to be. And I've avoided all the major trailers after the one from a couple months ago, so from Comic-Con. So yeah, I'm actually really stoked for it. I'm more looking forward to that but just barely. It's a little bit more. I love both. So
I can assume, and I'm assuming that if you'd kind of been trying to keep yourself fresh and spoiler free, you've avoided a lot of the online drama surrounding this film.
Yes.
Good for you. And I mean that sincerely, because it's war on me, and I'll get to that in a second. All right, Chris, plug whatever you would like, sir, and include your Batman on Film watch party in the Chicago area, and
of course.
And where's your temperature on Justice League?
You can find me on Twitter at Chris Clow, ChrisClow. You can check out my latest Comics on Film article, which actually has to do with the DCEU on movies.com, sort of re-examining Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal of Lex Luthor. I had a lot of fun writing it.
Well, that was a good article.
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
I read it.
And with Justice League, I've been waiting for this movie literally my entire life. Obviously, when the critical reception to Batman v Superman became public, I was disappointed, and it affected my enjoyment of that movie. So I'm hoping that a similar scenario does not play out with Justice League. But, I've wanted to see these characters together since I was a very, very small child in a movie. So my excitement isn't probably not as high as it could be, considering the creative team and all of the difficulties that the movie has had actually getting to the screen. But the promise of Justice League and what it portends for the future of DC Comics on film, and the looming presence of Superman that we still don't fully understand and can't fully quantify yet. I'm very excited for it. I probably more than any other major movie coming out this year. And it can't get here fast enough. I want to see what ends up happening with this movie.
All right, let me ask you this. Where were you on Batman v Superman?
Over the moon. I mean, those are my two absolutely favorite characters in fiction. When the movie actually came out, I detected some pretty core character violations, and that's my biggest problem I have more problems with Superman in that movie than I do with Batman. But overall, I mean, there were definitely bells that went off when it comes to actually translating the characters. So the things surrounding Justice League, as far as Batman recovering a segment of his faith in humanity and what they might end up doing with Superman, seems like it shows a lot of promise. What
is your take on the fact that DC and Warner Brothers are going to kind of change? They're changing gears after Justice League, and they're going to focus more on solo films and not beat people over the head with continuity and the interconnectedness with this shared universe, even though it is still technically a shared universe. Thoughts on that?
Basically, it just feels more truthful because, and you guys well know this. I mean, if you pick up an issue of Detective Comics, it's not going to beat you over the head with the fact that it takes place in the same continuity stream as the latest issue of Metal or the latest issue of Justice League. It just is. You know, there's an assumption that goes into play when you pick up a regular monthly comic book that, oh yeah, well, it is in the same world. Unless it explicitly tells you in like a Dark Knight 3 or something that it's not. So it just feels like a truthful extension of what the comics themselves do. If we go into the Batman without the Batman mentioning Aquaman, that doesn't mean that Aquaman doesn't exist in this iteration of the DCU.
Right.
It's just, it just is. So it seems totally fine with me that it doesn't even seem as much a de-emphasization as much as it seems like, well, we'll just reference it when it makes sense.
Right.
Because I think Jeff Johns even said this movie is not about another movie, like in reference, I think, to Aquaman. So and you guys probably know this. I mean, I love Jeff Johns. If he's the guy who's steering the ship, he should have been in this position from the beginning because he has such an innate love of everything DC. His comic book career is filled with things that you could only do at DC Comics. And his love for the characters is unimpeachable. You cannot dispute the dedication and the passion that he brings to everything that he does. So of course put that guy in the driver's seat for the movies. I wasn't sure if they were going to be able to actually use him, but the fact that they are is extraordinarily encouraging to me for the future of the DCEU. So if Justice League doesn't end up being as good as I certainly hope it will be, I'm still optimistic for the future because of his position in the driver's seat.
Ryan, I know we talked about this in episode 96, which is what's the word I want to use for episode?
It's lost in the BOF multiverse.
Yes,
it's in the BOF multiverse.
Yeah, it's in the BOF multiverse right now. It could show up at some other time. You never know. But
a crisis has to happen to break it out.
There could be one coming at some point in 2018. But what's your take on all that? Just, same question as Chris.
As in my temperature on Justice League?
That and, going forward as well. Because, like I said, we talked about it last week, but it's in that hidden multiverse, lost episode ether of wherever it exists. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's try to pull from that ether and see what I have to say. Justice League itself, I am, at this point, it is what it is. Like, it's going to come out. I'm going to go watch it and I'm going to make my decision then. I've been in wait and see mode ever since I saw BVS and I haven't really wavered from that too much. Everything that's happened has just made me just kind of take a step back and just wait and see what happens and see what they've come up with. And I just hope that, I hope I'm entertained and I hope it stays true to the characters and I hope it, tells a nice complete story and kind of does that. And I hope it does that. And if they want bonus points, they can make it kind of make sense of BVS for me story-wise to make those movies link together and have that kind of one help and inform the other. But in terms of going forward, I think it's a super smart idea. I mean, you've had the two most successful movies they've had in the DCEU, in my opinion, have been Man of Steel and Wonder Woman. And I think that is because they focused on, not because they're solo movies, but kind of because they are, but because they focus on the character and they let a filmmaker tell the story they want to tell. And I think the combination of those two things, in addition to not explicitly building towards another, team up movie or something, I think that just makes sense. It's what comics would do. You get your single issues of the stories you like, and when it makes sense, then you'll do a crossover. And I think that's the best point I can make is that they're going to do right by the characters and then do bigger things when it makes sense. And I think that's a recipe for success. And I hope that happens.
I agree with both of you. And I think the analogy toward this is what they do in the comics is very good because that is how DC has operated historically because, it's no secret I prefer Batman solo. I'm not a fan of, him mixing it up with superheroes and supervillains and all that stuff. I like to read Batman. I like to read detective and I get what I want. So I think this way going forward, yes, it's good for everybody. You've got the shared universe. You've got what I want to use, the independence, you're able to use, filmmakers are able to feel like they can do what they want to do without being really constrained by continuity. All right, Chris, one other question in regards to movies, if you don't mind, if I ask you, I just want to get your thoughts and hear your perspective. What do you think of this separate brand of DC on film that Warner Brothers is going to do that is not going to be part of the DC, the main DC cinematic universe, that, with this Joker movie and so forth?
You have to say it long way because there's not an official title yet.
Yeah, whatever it is.
I mean, I think there's room for it. Same thing with the continuity perspective. The comics tell so many different kinds of varying and different and weird and off the wall kinds of stories that why can't that extend to movies? I mean, we've seen Elseworld stories for a number of years. I mean, if this opens the door to a Red Sun adaptation, or if this opens the door to a live action Gotham by Gaslight or something to that effect, that would be awesome to see.
Yeah.
And I think that the idea of Flashpoint will likely ease people into that idea. I mean, obviously Flashpoint is going to have implications that we probably don't even fully understand yet on what the DCEU is going to be, but it will at least show moviegoers and general audiences that there can be different competing versions of these characters that don't have to encroach on the versions in another kind of universe. And I was on a episode of my other show, Geek Pulse Radio, talking about this the other day. Weirdly enough, I think Supergirl has shown people that aren't quite as embedded in this stuff as we are, that you can have competing versions of the characters, because for the very first time at the beginning of the second season of that show, you had a version of Superman on television that actually directly competed with a version of Superman in the movies. Warner Brothers has always been so tepid to do something like that before, and they finally actually pulled the trigger on it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a different take on Superman than we're watching in the movies, but I mean, you go back to the 70s, there was not a competing version of Superman against Christopher Reeve. There was not a competing version when it was John Hames Newton or Gerard Christopher on the Superboy TV show. There wasn't a competing version when Dean Cain was Superman. And really, technically, even though Brandon Routh was Superman at the same time that Smallville was on the air, Tom Welling never played Superman on Smallville. So even technically then, there wasn't a competing version of Superman. So if we get multiple versions of the same character now on film, as long as the movie's upfront about the fact that it is telling a different kind of story, then that's awesome. Let the Elseworlds floodgates open, because that could be room for really, really interesting and unique takes on DC Comics characters that don't even necessarily have to come from comics. So you could have an Elseworlds by a really off the wall kind of filmmaker, and it could probably be really cool. So I'm all for it.
I'm with you. I have no problem with that. I don't think that it will get confusing, like some people think. And I'm glad that they're doing that, because Chris, I don't know if you know Rick Shue's story. He played Superman in a stunt show at Six Flags San Antonio for, I don't know how long he did it, but he had a run at it.
Picture. He wore the S well. Absolutely.
And he had to sign an NDA where he could not interact with fans, because it was at the same time you had Lois and Clark on TV, and they did not want people to get confused that he wasn't Dean Cain. So that's where we were 20 years ago, or however long it was. And now you've got Gotham that's not part of the CW universe and so forth. So, why not? Why not have different versions on film? Even if it's Batman, I would have no problem with a Gotham by Gaslight, or if somebody really did want to do a version of The Dark Knight Returns, or just something that was original for that matter, and it not be part of the universe. I don't want to call it DCEU anymore, because someone made that up, and I have I wish they would just name it something. So, the movie DC universe, live action, whatever you want to call it. So anyway, go ahead. You want to say something, sir?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that people who might be kind of hung up on the idea, they don't quite get the fact that over the last 5 years at least, movie fans and comic book fans have a lot more in common than I think a lot of people thought they did. Because, before the Avengers came out, I remember it was commonplace seeing complaints about what the Avengers would mean for comic book cinema, and that it would be too confusing and that the framework was too convoluted for people to get into. But at the end of the day, with what happened with the Avengers when it ultimately hit theaters, people like to see that kind of stuff. Comic book fans love when their heroes are teamed up, typically. Bill, you're the exception, but typically speaking, comic book fans love seeing their heroes teamed up.
Overall, I'm the exception. Now, I love Superman. I mean, he's not Batman level for me, but I grew up a Superman fan as well. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm reading Action Comics right now. I'm totally hooked on this Oz, spoiler alert, Jor-El story and stuff. I like all that. I just, Batman was my character, and I just always liked Batman by himself, and I just never got into the team up stuff, even though I watched Super Friends every Saturday morning when I was a kid in the 70s. So I'm weird. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, it's not. Yeah. It's not even that you're weird. It's just that it just lends itself to the wider perception, because before Avengers hit, you had a fair amount of commentators who said that this would never work as well as it does in the comics, and it ended up working better, So movie fans and comic book fans are, at the end of the day, they're still people. And people have a general sense of camaraderie when it comes to the kinds of stories that they like to devote themselves to. So what the Avengers did so brilliantly is that it introduced an entire segment of the movie-going public to the concept of comic book style storytelling. Now, obviously, there are fundamental differences between the way that movies and comics operate, but when it comes to just the characters, more characters have generally engendered more interest when it comes to the Marvel movies. And since DC did the Justice League first, I wish they'd have gotten there first. But now that we're finally getting to a point where DC characters can be that, they can show people that there's not just one way to do a comic book style story in a movie. And that's at the end of the day, that's what I like about the concept of the DC cinematic universe, is that it's going to be really the only core alternative that we have to the MCU. And I hope that it thrives by being itself and by being DC, because there's a DC style that we have not yet seen in the movies that makes their best comics work. So hopefully that's something that in the future will be taken and ran with.
I hope that Flashpoint comes into production. I hope they make Flashpoint, because I would love to see
that'd be great.
Like Jeffrey Dean Morgan, excuse me guys, Jeffrey Dean Morgan play the Flashpoint Batman / Thomas Wayne in that movie. If they would do something crazy like that, I would be all for it.
Yep, same here.
All right, Ryan, now you can plug something, sir.
All right, yeah, follow me on Twitter at SMB_Ryan, and follow the Everyone Loves the Tim Drake Robin podcast on Twitter at ELTD Podcast. And my watch party is going to be in Cary, North Carolina on November 18th at the Frank Theaters Stadium 11, and afterwards we're going to eat at Chewy's Tex-Mex in the same shopping center.
Awesome. Take pictures and stuff, video if you can.
Oh yeah, we will.
Chris,
yes.
yours is in
Skokie, Illinois.
Skokie, yes. Skokie, yes.
On the same day, November 18th, time to be determined. As soon as the show times are released for that theater's exhibitions of Justice League, I'm not going to stay quiet about it. That's for sure.
Okay.
But,
are you planning, or just like in advance, are you looking for maybe 3, 4, 5 o'clock-ish screening, 7 o'clock? What do you kind of think in your mind what you want to do?
Ideally, it'll be between 4 and 5, because if the movie's a couple of hours, then I think that would line up perfectly with heading literally next door to Buffalo Wild Wings after the movie's over. So, I'm really looking forward to hosting that party. We should have a lot of fun. It's ample parking at the theater, unlike a lot of places in Chicago proper. So come on out. Come on out. Look for the Facebook page.
Yes. Okay. And, of course, Rick and I will be in Austin, Texas at the Alamo Draft House on South Lamar. And we also are planning sometime, probably a 4 or 5 o'clock screening. And as soon as the dadgum tickets go on sale,
hopefully next week, I hope,
we will let you know what screening and which exact theater at the Alamo Draft House we are going to view. So, and that goes for everybody. So be looking for that on BOF Proper. All right. Chris, thanks a lot, dude, for coming on. You're welcome anytime to come on, and definitely want to get you on for Justice League after we all see it and we can discuss it.
Oh, I'd love to have the chance. I always love coming home, as I said before, and thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
Anytime. All right, announcer Rachel will take us out, and bye for now.
Hey now! You've been listening to the Batman on Film podcast, a proud member and the sponsor of the Batman Podcast Network, batmanpodcastnetwork.com. You can listen to the BOF podcast on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, TuneIn, and wherever good podcasts like this one can be found. Want to advertise on the BOF podcast? Go to advertisecast.com/the Batman on Film Con podcast. Follow Jett on Twitter at Batman on Film and on BOF's Facebook fan page at facebook.com/Jett.BatmanOnFilm. Email Jett via Jett@batman-on-film.com. Follow Rick on Twitter at ShoeRick and on Facebook at facebook.com/BOF-Shoe. For Jett, Rick, Justin, and Ryan, I'm announcer Rachel. Thanks for listening.